Previously on agentpalmer.com, sailing into history, Netflix tells the tale of the race of the century, Lackawanna College alum to premiere Falcons football documentary, and if you haven't thought about creating your own thing, perhaps it's time. This is the Palmer Files, episode 83, with narrator and author Travis Baldree, whose debut novel, Legends and Lattes, we discuss along with his career trajectory and how that has also been shaped by his curiosity and his hobbies. We talk about his many hats along the way, from his current gig as an audiobook narrator to his days doing almost everything you can think of in making video games, plus reading, nerding out, creative introverts, outlining, editing, and much, much more. Are you ready? Let's do the show. Hello and welcome to the Palmer Files. I'm your host, Jason Stershik, also known as Agent Palmer, and on this 83rd episode is Travis Baldree, narrator to many an audiobook, former video game designer, and a freshly published author of his debut novel, Legends and Lattes. I reached out to him after I fell in love with Legends and Lattes, the cozy fiction in high fantasy with low stakes, and if you have even the slightest interest just from that, then you probably should go pick it up. If you need more, just know that an adventuring orc named Biv has a new dream, and that dream involves opening up a coffee shop. We, of course, discuss that book and how it came to be, but we also talk about career transitions and how Travis came to be an audiobook narrator, which is just one of the many reasons he ended up as a published author. You'll also hear us tell tale of creative introverts and self-accountability, outlining and editing, not being scared of technology, and of course, think back on the way things were in the command prompt days. All of that and a whole lot more is coming your way shortly. But first, if you want to discuss this episode as you listen or afterwards, you can tweet me at Agent Palmer, my guest Travis Baldree at Travis Baldree, that's TravisBaldree, and this show at The Palmer Files. You can find more information about Travis, his debut novel Legends and Lattes, and his narrations at travisbaldree.com. Don't forget you can see all of my writings and rantings, including a spoiler-free review of Legends and Lattes on agentpalmer.com. And of course, email can be sent to thepalmerfiles@gmail.com. So without further ado, let's get into it. Travis, I picked up your book and read it, and I know you as an author. It is not your primary day job. Is it becoming more commonplace for people to now know you as an author only?
I don't know if it's commonplace or not. I feel like the streams get crossed every once in a while. I have a very strange work history, so I'm kind of used to it. But there are certainly a bunch of people who only know me as an author and are surprised that I did anything else.
I mean, maybe it's the podcaster coming through like and these conversations. I'm not surprised you have other things, but first-time authors, I'm always amazed at like what they do or do not pull from their work history, right? Because obviously, you know, there are creatives that go completely in a different direction, and there are creatives that beg, borrow, and steal from like the jobs they've had. Yeah. For Legend and Lattes, how much did you beg, borrow, and steal from like either previous experience or what have you? I think
all of those things are shot through it to some extent in various ways, both from just like anything from the setting to the way that it's written to actually the characters themselves to various degrees. So currently my day job is an audiobook narrator. That's what a narrator. That's what I do every day. Before that, I made video games for 20 years. And so I have a weird mix of stuff.
I'm going to say, just hearing this, it feels like within the entertainment industry, you've had two of the more thankless jobs in entertainment. Like, I feel like video game developers it's like the worst. It feels like the worst job. And then narrators, it's like, like I just immediately go to what was the doc? I know that voice, which is not necessarily narration. It's more like the voice behind the thing, but it feels like you can walk down a street without getting noticed. Online, as a video game developer, you will just get crap. You will never get you will get very little praise, it feels like. And as long as you don't talk in public, people won't be like, do I know you?
Well, I mean, I appreciate not being recognized in public because I'm an introvert. But as far as the way the two industries play out, I mean, making video games is like being slowly immersed in acid. That is kind of the general idea. And while as an industry it was really good for me in a lot of ways, it was terrible in others, and I'm glad to be done with it. Audiobooks may not be as like flashy as other performance arts, but it's actually a really welcoming kind of community. Mostly because it's like book people, right? The kind of people who listen to books are the kind of people who read books. And book people in general are just nicer people. So the experience you have interacting with people who consume the art you make is really, really different. It's really, for me, it's been very, very positive, it's just the total opposite of making games. And I made successful games, and I was good at it, but it doesn't matter. You're up there you're up on the you're up there waiting for somebody to throw the ball and drop you into the bucket. I mean, that's just the way it is.
But it's all creative space stuff. Did you always, I don't know, have a creative bent? I
always wanted to do something, creative. The nice thing about games, and the reason I ended up doing it, is because it's a synthesis of a lot of different art forms. You've got art, you've got writing, you've got sound, you've got music, you get performance, you get everything in games, which is fairly unique. You can't do that anywhere else. You also combine that with, kind of like more, I don't want to say scientific, but, things that are more
the
logical,
coding aspect I would call scientific,
methodical kind of art in terms of engineering. And I've done all of those things, and they're all great for their own reasons. The only problem with games is, the relationship with the audience that's developed over time, which it didn't used to be that way. In kind of like the enthusiast era, when everybody was just so amazed that anything showed up on their screen at all, it was a very different sort of relationship. But you get on into like the iPhone era, where people take technology for granted, and it's just magic that everybody just assumes works. Then the effort that goes into it becomes, passé. They don't understand the effort that goes into it, so they don't appreciate it. Previously, just making your computer work and installing drivers was like a feat. So everybody had an innate appreciation that this was magic.
I think maybe it's my age and or like when you started with technology, because I'm not going to say everybody my age started with technology. I started very young, right? Like I was 7 or 8, and I asked for a Nintendo, and I got a PC, right? So immediately I'm learning a very different set of skills with technology.
Those upper memory blocks, and editing your config sys and your auto exec bat to make sure that the mouse will actually function, and you'll get a Sound Blaster drivers online.
Well, that was one part of it, but it was also like I remember like playing in DOS, and I don't know if it was like vanilla DOS or like a program, but like I remember just typing in random colors and being able to change the screen or make lines. For better or worse, some of that has come and gone over the years, but I think that having that start, and I'm still one that will take technology for granted on occasion, but when it breaks, I'm the first one to go, it's probably something I did.
It's like, just like a different relationship, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I don't, my immediate reaction is, oh crap.
What did I do?
I'm the bad user.
What did I do? And I missed that era. That was a pretty cool era. And it's over, and it's not going to come back. And I mean, that's the way it is. The things that get created on computers now, as far as games go, are just mind blowing. I mean, it's unbelievable the things that people are pulling off. Knowing what has to go into it, it's just staggering. But audiobooks are way easier. The technology doesn't change that much. So here's the question.
Where's the shift, right? Like I'm going to say, from where I sit, being a narrator and then being an author, I can see that. That makes sense to me. But going from video game development to narration and audiobooks and
it's a bigger leap.
Using your voice.
Yeah, it's a bigger leap. Especially since I was not a voice actor. That was not what I did in video games. It was my job at all. I was an engineer and an artist and a designer. So I did not actually, and I did some VO toward the end of my career in video games just because I just wanted to do it.
Okay. I
used to read to my kids a lot. I really love spoken word audio. I'm a big fan of audiobooks and obviously books. I just think it's really cool. Where I really hooked in with audiobooks was listening to the narrator Frank Muller reading Stephen King stuff. Green Mile is still like my number one audiobook. I just thought it was amazing. And I read to my kids and I tried to kind of like, I was influenced by that kind of delivery. I just thought it was so cool how you could conjure up a narrative using your voice in a way that was so much more than what you got by just sitting there and reading the book in your brain.
Now, was that done for you?
And I read to my kids. I read to my wife.
No, I mean, like, did your parents read to you, and did they use voices?
I know my parents read to me some when I was little, but I don't really have any memory of the reading voices. I was a voracious reader as a kid. They probably gave up pretty quick because I just wanted to read.
Okay.
But I'm also, when I read to myself, I'm like a really fast reader. You know, I zip through things, I can skim, and I just kind of get a better experience when it's out loud because there's no skimming. I just I get all the juice out of the fruit, which I think is really nice. Yeah. Anyway, I was getting equipment for doing VO recording for games, and because I didn't want to pay for studio space. So I was just getting the basic interface stuff and decent mic just so I could get some of the VO done at reasonable quality. And so I had it. And my kids didn't really need me to read to them anymore. And I stumbled across ACX, which is the service that Audible and Amazon have for facilitating indie audiobook production, where authors can put their books up for audition, narrators can audition, and they'll go through the process of producing it, and then it gets published just like any other audiobook, which is cool. And I just ended up doing it on a lark because I thought it would be fun. And I had the equipment.
Yeah. Okay.
And it turned out that I really liked it. And so I just kept doing it on the side. And I was pretty good at it, and I enjoyed it. And eventually, there came a point where I was like, you know what? I could absolutely just keep doing this. People want me to narrate their audiobooks, and I don't have to keep making games. So I finished doing the last one I was shipping, and I said, okay, I think I'm done. It's time to move on. I'm going to do something else.
How long? I know books are all different lengths, but like the average book. You know, how much time are you putting into turning it around?
I'm pretty fast. I usually finish about 3 hours of finished audio a day.
Okay.
Which takes 5 to 6 hours, depending on the complexity of the text.
Okay.
It's about 10,000 words for an hour for me, roughly.
And does your being a fast reader kind of tie in to your, I don't know, proficiency in covering that many words?
I don't think so as far as pace, because you can only read as fast as the text demands. Everybody's got a pace, and some people are like 9,000 words an hour, and some are more. Accuracy matters. Like, how long can you read without messing up and having to do a pickup? That certainly matters to how much audio you can produce in a day. Your endurance matters. Your ability to just make your butt go and sit in the box for consecutive hours on a schedule to get it done and not go have snacks. Or, you're working for yourself. Those things matter. But as far as like pace of reading, technically, there's not that much to it. I have other technical advantages as far as overall production time that are because I'm a nerd, but they don't have to do with the read itself.
I think there's a lot of technological advances that nerds and or geeks, regardless of classification, like we have over other people. Like I recently upgraded my mixer because I had to, but the old mixer was a hand-me-down, and the one before that was a hand-me-down, and I had the setup figured out in about 15 minutes. And then I called a friend and I was like, hey, I think I just need you to talk to me. And he's probably an uber audio nerd. And he's like, well, how'd you set it up? So I'm explaining it to him as I'm looking and making sure the levels are all good. And he's like, that shouldn't work. And I was like, yeah, but it does.
Yes, but it does.
And you know, there's
Technology.
it's kind of just like, it was almost trial and error. Like I went to school for marketing, right?
Yeah.
And communications, not technology. This was all hobbyist. Hobbyist, I
Some
guess.
of it may get into that technological background you're talking about, where you can just on the DOS command line type a few things and you get colors on the screen. You know that you can do stuff.
Yeah.
You know that you can bang around and figure it out, and the machine it's not opaque to you. The mechanisms are not fully opaque.
Yeah. Yeah. And they're definitely not scary, I guess is the other thing too, right? Because some people,
they're just going to call support and they don't want to touch anything.
Yep.
That's it. So you asked how long it takes to turn around a book.
Yeah.
So if you figure that a book is, if an average book is just 100,000 words, that's 10 hours of audio for me. That's a little over 3 days to read out loud. And then there's a proofing pass where somebody listens, makes sure that what I've read matches the book, and they'll let me know timestamps and the things that I got wrong so that I can fix them. And then I'll do pickups, and then I finalize the audio. I have a very integrated process. So for me to do a book can sometimes be from start to done and shipped in a week, because my proofer basically just proofs for me. And because I'm a nerd, I have a very integrated editing and mastering process. That means I don't outsource it, and it happens in like less than an hour.
Gotcha.
So I have some advantages in my overall production speed.
So I guess the question would be, you're on a podcast right now, and you've got, and podcasts have exploded in the time you've been doing audiobooks, and clearly you have all of the technology for it. Why haven't you started a podcast?
Literally not enough hours in the day.
Okay. I mean, is there an interest though? Is like the interest there, but the time's not? Or
I think probably a combination of the time it requires and the sort of hustle and the production of content and getting guests and being that often after I've already spent a lot of time in a box talking into a microphone. It's probably just never gonna happen for me. It's probably just not my personality. I like talking to people, but I'm not the person who goes to a party and seeks out conversations. I have to get drunk first, and then when somebody corners me, then I hold forth.
This keeps coming up, and it's only in the last few episodes, but like I keep talking to people that are creative introverts, which by the way, I fall into that category, right? Like I don't necessarily need to get drunk, but like I need to be pushed into the conversation, and then I can stop being a wallflower. Like I can do it. I don't want to. Like I want to be.
It's got an energy cost, right? Some people it depletes energy to do that, and some people they get it. And I'm jealous of everybody who recharges from that sort of social interaction. I wish I did.
I don't know. I feel like it's twofold, because I get energized by having this conversation, but I will also get equally as energized from editing this in post, or writing my next blog post, or editing my next so the recharge happens for us somewhere else along the way.
Yeah.
And maybe that's just what makes us creatives, I guess. But I'm just fascinated by the fact that we're all introverts, but very few of us do creative introverted things, right? Like you put out a book and you put your voice out there, and I'm putting out something into the world. It feels like that's the next. Like when I was growing up,
an interaction we control.
Well, I mean, that's true, but when I was growing up, it was the geeks will inherit the earth, and now I think it's the introverts will, just because we're quiet.
Well, and weirdly, I feel like society overall is becoming a lot more introverted. I mean, who wants to talk on the phone? No, you want to text, so you can get it at your leisure when you are feeling up to it. And I think this is almost like, this feels like this is an expanding thing, not a contracting thing.
Well, that's true. And you're talking to a guy who is the one person in my friend circles that calls people. Like I'm the guy that's still like, no, I use the phone app on my phone.
For real. I'm You are a dying breed, sir.
Yeah, but you know what? I don't know what I'm trying to hold on to, but I enjoy it more. I will even call people and just be like, "Yep, I got your thing. We're all good." Which, yeah, admittedly,
and I don't think that's a bad thing. I'm not actually denigrating it.
Okay.
I think it's actually kind of great. It's just, it feels like as a society, it's easier not to. And everybody increasingly feels like it's easier not to, and that they're effectively choosing that sort of like deferred interaction.
In a roundabout way, it's why I started this show. Because this show is just long form conversation. Mm-hmm. And who has a long conversation anymore?
Not that many people.
And I'm a talker. I may be an introvert, but you get me one-on-one and I will talk your ear off.
I have a lot of conversations, but they are all almost exclusively text.
Do you miss the okay, so if a lot of your conversations are text and you're doing audio all day, do you miss maybe some of the inflection that you can listen? Like, you can only infer so much from the written word. So, like, you know, I can get excited and you can tell that. Even if we weren't on video, you could tell, you could hear that. Like, do you miss that at all?
I'm not sure, because everything is so rich with it. There's so many more layers to text conversation than there used to be when you factor in emojis and animated GIFs and all of the other window dressing that we've added. It's amazing how much you can shade text with all of the other things that you can tag on now. It's like kind of impressive, actually.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Not that I don't like human connection and don't sometimes want personal conversations, but there's a unique advantage in really long conversations in the fact that you can spread them out over an unrealistically long period of time. Like, I can have an ongoing conversation over an entire day that has long spurts where, you know, I can be doing something else, but we come right back in and pick it up, and none of the context is lost. It doesn't have to be compressed into that same one-on-one experience.
That's true. That's true. Although it also gives you time. You get time to respond, right? Like, somebody gives you the I don't know, the conundrum, and you're like, you know what? I'm going to go. That. I'll figure this out.
And there's definitely something to be said for immediacy, but I don't know. They feel like different kinds of communication that each have their own merits.
So we kind of talked at the top about Legends and Lattes. I loved it, and I've seen nothing but praise for it in the little online circles I've got. Did you expect the reaction you got, whatever reaction it was?
God, no. God, no. Good Lord, no. I only released it to go through the process of releasing a book because I work with people who release books all the time, and I was curious, and I like knowing how things work.
Okay.
I'm a nerd.
Yeah.
So I wanted to go through the full publication process and do it and put it out the way that, you know, so you read people's books, like you're always coming in at the end, right? And you make all kinds of observations about those books. I like this, I don't like this, or whatever, but, you know, I can't really talk because I've never written a book. So it's like doing it all is almost an excuse to be able to talk about it with some kind of knowledge, some sort of firsthand knowledge, so that you're not just a bystander, which I like, because I like to be able to talk about these things in depth and have like the justification to do it. So I don't feel like some douchebag standing on the side of the road heckling or providing ridiculous, non-applicable advice.
Yes.
Or whatever. So that's a lot of that figured into me deciding to publish the thing. And all I really wanted out of it was to pay for the cover art. I figured I could sucker some people into doing that. So it did not go the way that I expected.
Was there? I mean, look, I'll be the first to admit that's a long way to go because writing a book by itself is a haul. Ignoring that you were curious about the publishing side, like the writing is not just easy by most people's standards.
No, writing is hard. I did this for National Novel Writing Month, so this is a 1-month book. I did this last November. And I was doing it with a friend, my friend Avon, who is another narrator, and we both wrote our books during November and, you know, kept each other honest on our word counts and our daily stuff.
I feel like before you move on, that's the most important thing. Because at least speaking selfishly, if my best friend wasn't a fellow creative, actually 2 of my best friends are fellow creatives that are probably the most authentic at calling me on my bullshit. Because I can easily make excuses. I didn't feel it today, so I didn't write.
Yep.
And they'll be like, yeah, I didn't either, but I did write. Or, or I did do the creative thing, even though I wasn't up for it. It's like, oh, well, then I don't have an excuse. It's just like, you need
just
that
little
person.
Voice of accountability.
Yeah. And there are times, and I'm sure you as someone who's working by yourself, we can be accountable to ourselves some of the time. I don't think we can be accountable to ourselves all of the time.
No. And honestly, for my daily work, because I work by myself, I've structured it so that I don't have to. So for instance, when I work live on Discord. I have a Discord server. People come in and can watch me work. I basically have office hours. So they can't make me work. But just the knowledge is that someone is there and might think less of me if I wasn't is just enough
of a push
to get my butt in the chair. So I've just structured it so that I've built that accountability into my day.
Does it help to have an audience?
I like having it because it makes it less lonely. You're just not by yourself in a box all day. I have a little iPad down here, an iPad mini, next to my bigger iPad for manuscript. And so I can see in text what people are saying and all of the ridiculous GIFs that they dump in there. And it's just nice. And I can talk directly to them. They can hear me. And then they can text back to me.
Nice.
And just having that kind of ongoing water cooler is really valuable for me personally.
All right. So your friend's keeping you accountable. You write through November and I know a little bit about National Writing Month. Did you finish the first draft during the month of November?
I did.
Okay.
I did. So I wrote the first draft. I had outlined beforehand, I've tried National Novel Writing Month any number of times. This is the first time I actually finished.
Well, I want to say congratulations, because a lot of people don't keep trying. That's a kudos to you, because some people.
Well, I thought I was a pantser, right? I think a lot of people are like, you know what? I'm just going to get in there, and the words are going to flow from my fingers, and magic is going to happen. And I desperately wanted that to be the case, and it just was not. So this was the first year I outlined, and I just have to have that, I guess. I'm sad that I have to have it, but I need enough structure so that I can lunge for the next signpost in the blizzard.
The blog is over a decade, and I've established a process by which I schedule out it's weekly, so I schedule out maybe 3 or 4 months in advance. Mm-hmm. I learned that through years of sitting down. The blog posts on Thursdays. I think for the most part, it's always posts on Thursdays. But there were a few years where I would sit down on a Tuesday or a Wednesday night and go, what do I write for tomorrow? And it wasn't until I started to schedule out, right? Like, I'm at the end of the day, I can overrule myself and be like, I don't want to write about that. But if I sit down on Wednesday night and I at least have a prompt,
you just got to have something.
That's such a, it sounds like such a small thing, but it's such a huge thing. Even if you go a different direction, you're still moving. And
it's easy to imagine that the thing you said a month or two ago, you had a really good reason for it. Even if you didn't, you can trick yourself into believing it, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
At the moment, you're like, well, this has to be the best idea ever. But if you write it for future you, you're like, well, if it isn't the best idea ever, they'll figure it out. Yeah. And then future you receives it and is like, this must have been the best idea ever. I don't have to think about it at all. And
or at the very least, it's an idea, right? Because I think the worst thing a creative in any field can battle is the blank page, the blank space, the blank screen, the blank canvas. That's the worst.
It does. It sucks.
It's not like problem solving. Problem solving's fun. Like, how do I write myself out of this corner? That's exciting. That's something new. But that's a blank page. What do I do now? Like, that's scary.
Yep.
Well, so if you don't mind me asking, how many attempts had you done before?
I want to say it was probably 5, maybe 4 or 5.
Okay.
Sprinkled out through a number of years, and I would either get, I'd usually get a quarter of the way, maybe halfway in, you get in the boggy middle and, I'd poop out. This book got done because it had an outline, because the concept was relatively simple. I could hold the whole book in my brain.
Okay.
And because it was something that I understood, I knew why people would do the things that they did. And I knew what was important about it. I did expect it to be jokier than it was. It certainly changed from what I thought I was going to do to what actually showed up on the page. But a lot of that is not, the same outline would have applied to both books.
Okay.
It was more about the tone of it and the way that it was expressed and how earnestly it was expressed. And then after that, the subsequent parts are easier, right? After you write it, there's editing.
Yep.
But I like editing.
Well,
because
that makes you...
most of the hard work has been done. You're refining.
Yeah, no, and look, I get that, and I think you get that, and I've helped edit other people's things, but I've also talked to people that are like, man, I hate editing. Like, I'm with you. I think that editing is the best thing, because editing takes the circle and makes it, a mug, right? Instead of just, or it solidifies it into something more concrete.
Yeah. One of the reasons I think I don't mind editing is because I make an honest game attempt the first time through to do as much as I can not to have to edit it. Like,
okay.
I'm not one of those people who just like slaps it down and is like, oh, I got through it. I'm fairly meticulous and careful when I write, even knowing I'm going to edit it, because I'm like, I want to find the problems ahead of time because I don't want to rewrite the whole book.
Yeah.
I want to be doing grace notes and important things, I don't want to be just cleaning up a mess. So yeah. I do, and which is helpful with the outline too, right? I'm making a game attempt to make something that is reasonably in the shape that it will be in the end. So editing feels a little bit more refined and less like, oh my God, it's a mountain of earth I have to move now, which is probably why I don't mind editing, because I've been consciously trying to do some of that work ahead.
All along. Yeah.
I just like to work that way because personally, I don't like to redo things.
Okay. That's fair. I mean, I think we all create those processes at some point, but you have to go through it.
Yeah, you have to do what works for you and the way that you work. I know a lot of people who are just these white hot writers. They're just going to put down 10,000 words a day and they don't look back. And when they go through the edit, they have more work to do. But they have made it to the end in record time to begin with, so they have that time to spend, and they prefer that way of writing.
So you get done with it. If you don't mind me asking, I don't usually go this behind the scenes, but I'm curious. Was it called Legends and Lattes the entire way through?
Day one.
Okay.
It was called Legends and Lattes. I wrote the blurb before I wrote the book. And the final book is almost identical to the first one. It was certainly edited. There were thousands of edits, but a lot of them were language. A couple of minor scenes were added to make sure some characters stayed present, and redundant crap was removed. But
sure.
The final book and the first draft are remarkably similar.
Wow.
Because it's not a very complicated story.
Well, but I appreciated that, because I've been reading a lot lately. And I've been reading authors more or less than anything else. So I've been reading through like Len Dayton's bibliography and Douglas Copeland's bibliography, and there's a few other authors that I'm reading through. And so I'm taking what's next in publish order, because I feel like I'm learning a little bit about these authors as I go through. Like, okay, so Len Dayton wrote a lot of spy fiction, and then he wrote some World War II nonfiction. But having read it in the order he published, I can see where he stood on his own shoulders a little bit. Yeah. And I feel like that's important from a reading standpoint, because it's kind of like watching the original Jurassic Park before like any of the other subsequent ones. Like, that one tells you something.
It's also really interesting to watch an author evolve.
It is, but what my point is, like, some of these, because I've fallen in love with their writing, some of them are do get a little complex. And first of all, I don't know what marketing was done, but your book ended up on my Twitter feed somehow, and that's how it ended up on my wish list, and I bought it.
Yeah, there wasn't any real marketing.
So I just happened to follow somebody that
Sean and McGuire did a lot of did a lot as far as putting it in front of people.
And I should say that one of the things reading through authors' bibliographies that has, I don't know, kind of become a thing I do is I avoid as much of the back cover as possible and the inside disc. I am always appalled when I sit down to write these reviews and I try and make them as spoiler free as possible. And I go, all right, I've read the book. What do they say on the back cover? And I go, what? That's on the back cover? I'm glad I didn't know that going. But anyway, the point is a lot of these things get complex and I don't know what I'm getting into. So I don't know how on edge to be. And I think I read your book in a weekend because it was like, oh, this is just fun. Like this is amazing.
Just zip to the end. You just zip through.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a comfort book. I wrote it as comfort for me. So It was written as a comfort book. So there's things that as a book, like it lacks. It's it's straightforward. The prose is fairly workmanlike. It just wants to get in and get out and deliver what it wants to deliver. And that's the fantasy world is not a big, complicated fantasy world that requires a lot of, backfilling of lore. And that's by design. It's not like I couldn't write a complicated fantasy story, but it would defeat the purpose of the book.
Yeah.
The purpose of the book is to have instant familiarity. It's like comfort food. Yeah. It's like when you go for comfort food, you don't go have something new. You go have something that you recognize and that you hope will make you feel good.
That's true.
So that's what it is. I mean, it's comfort food. It's chicken soup.
So I would ask then, like, do you want to do it again?
I have to. Actually, I'm 5 chapters away from the end of book 2.
Okay. Now, this is I'm parsing this together. Was book 2 something you thought about? Where in the line? Because obviously, when you start for National Writing Month, you're not like, I'm going to write a trilogy.
No. But when I finished, I was like, I enjoyed doing that. I have a sequel in mind.
Okay.
Which is not what I'm writing right now.
Ooh.
So I had a book in mind. I knew what I was going to write. It was going to be a cozy mystery, which was going to involve like an author, and it was going to be set in the magic college in the city. And I plotted the whole thing out with massive deal. I knew exactly what I was going to write. I didn't write it because I either wasn't ready to write it. I didn't like it. I got a long way into it and I was like, you know what? No.
Okay.
But I wasn't obliged to write that initially. So I'll back up.
Yeah.
Publishing Legends and Lattes. I go through the editing process. I commissioned art for the cover. I've commissioned tons of art, so that wasn't a big stretch because I have a background in games. And I learned about vellum and ebook formatting and all about, ISBNs and how to get things published in a brick and mortar store and on Amazon and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And that was fun. It was fun to learn. And I had beta readers and sent out ARCs and I did the whole thing and I posted the cover art, and the cover art kind of blew up because the cover art, I think I can, objectively say that it does a pretty good job of establishing the tone and the content of the book in a way that is understandable and appealing. I think I think the cover was a success. And it kind of blew up. So I was like, oh shit, I'll turn on the pre-orders because I was ready to go. So I did. And then I launched the book and nothing went as expected. It was all, I didn't have marketing. I didn't plan for marketing. Again, I was not really I'm not trying to switch careers to becoming a writer.
Okay. That's fair.
I just wanted to release it and have fun, but it became something else.
Has it still remained fun? I mean, obviously this is a lot more than you expected. So
yes, the experience of this book has remained fun because it's been almost uniformly positive, and it's basically a book about nice, competent people being nice. So anybody who responds to it at all, the response is usually nice. And the book is at great pains to let you know exactly what it is. So if that's not what you wanted, the likelihood that you read the book is very low.
Okay.
Nobody's going to look at that cover and that tagline and say, gosh, I really hope this is like Game of Thrones. They're just not. So
That's fair.
The audience is predisposed when they pick it up to probably want what it's doing.
Yeah.
And if it's even reasonably successful, I mean, it's just, I don't know. And maybe that wouldn't be the case if it was any other kind of book. But for this book, it's been really, really pleasant. And the interactions I've had with people have been unbelievably rewarding. I get so much fan art. It's nuts. I get nice notes. and I get to talk to people about stuff. And every time anybody recognizes something in that book that I put in there that was important to me and they recognize it, it's like magic. It's this little moment of connection where you're like, I'm not alone, and somebody else out there experienced and saw the same thing that I experienced and saw and cared enough to tell me. And that's just super cool. And it was not something I anticipated. So anyway, it was amazing.
Okay.
Now I'm writing book 2. Book 2 is hard, but for a variety of reasons.
Okay. But book 2, I'm presuming you also outlined.
I've been through several of those. So after the book was released, several agents came up to me about taking it traditional. And I was like, what the hell? Okay, fine. What have I got to lose, right? I got to launch it and do it my way, and it was fun, and it did really well. Yeah. Why not? And so I said yes, and they went to Tor, and then Tor picked it up, and so now it's being republished as a Tor paperback in November, and they took over. And part of that was me writing a second book.
Okay.
And which, of course, at the time, I'm like, oh, well, I know I'm going to write anyway. I've got this massive outline. I know exactly what it is. This would be no big deal. So then I go to write it, and this is not easy at all. I get about 20,000 words in, and I'm like, I hate it. It doesn't feel honest. I don't connect with this. I feel like I'm writing this. I feel like like it's the cart before the horse situation. Like I'm not writing this book for the right reason. Like there's not something fundamental in the book that I'm connecting with. It's too much plot and too little people.
Okay. Yeah.
And it just didn't work for me. And so then I'm just terrified. I'm like, oh, I agreed I was going to write a second book. Now what I'm going to write? So I went through 2 more restarts trying to find that. And both I scrapped. So I probably, at that point, I've got like 50 or 60,000 words behind me. And I'm like, I don't have anything. And then I finally arrived at something.
Okay.
And it's currently 10,000 words longer than the last book. And I'm getting close to done. I've got like 5 chapters. I'll wrap it up. And it was just much harder. Anyway, initially there's this, everybody always talks about like the second book being the hardest. It's totally true. But part of the reason it was hard for me was because I couldn't untangle the feelings I had while I was writing, whether they were about the book or whether they were about pressure from the previous book.
Okay.
Like the weight of expectations, like the idea that you liked this, now I need to write something that you will like, as opposed to something for me. And that feeling of like, kind of like nausea and unhappiness when you're looking at something and saying, like, this doesn't feel right. I couldn't untangle that feeling from what I was getting from while I was reading what I'd written or the act of reading it. I just didn't know what the difference was anymore. And so it took me a while to pull them apart to be able to say, this feeling is about the book and what I'm writing, and this feeling is totally different.
How did you pull them apart?
I stumbled upon something that didn't feel wrong.
Okay. Okay.
I had to just basically bang my head against the wall until I finally found something that didn't feel the same way that the previous drafts had felt, so that I could understand the distinction.
Okay.
But I didn't know that was going to happen. So I'm just sort of like in horror, blindly stumbling ahead, trying to figure that out. And it was just such a relief to discover the difference between those two things.
I mean, I think it's important as we creatives in general, when we go from thing to thing, because it's really hard to leave the past, right? Like, it's just kind of the way it is. Like I started the podcast with a successful blog behind me going, well, I know what regular content looks like. I mean, I didn't. I mean, they're very much like apples and oranges. It's not just, a different medium or a different context. Like, it's very different, but you go in with the mindset of like, well, I did this, I can do this, right? And it's a good mindset to start with, but you almost have to leave it once the gun goes off. Like that I did this, I can do something else is great to get you to the starting line. When the gun goes off, leave it behind the line and move forward in something fresh, because that's kind of it's a little bit of what you're talking about, where you brought that first book along with you. It's like no one told you to do that, by the way. It's what we do.
if you care anything about pleasing, I'm a big people pleaser. So if you care anything about pleasing people, you want to continue to please them. Like, okay, Tor picked up this book because they liked the first book. I want them to be happy with the second one. People liked the first book. I want them to be happy with the second one. It's got to be like in the same world, so they're going to have some expectations. Does it have to have coffee in it? Does it have to have, what does it have to have in it? Do they have to make a shop go from, nothing to something? Does there have to be this, fixer-upper component? What has to be in there to keep them happy? And you can't stop thinking about that.
Okay.
Right? Because what am I writing? It's another one in the same series. What was important about it, right?
Yeah.
And it's hard to decide what's important about it because different things are important to different people.
Yeah.
So the next one there is no coffee. There is no, everybody's favorite freaking character doesn't show up. It's not. It's about something else. And it's about something probably a little messier. But eventually I came to terms with the fact that I can write this and it's something that I can find relatable. They can put some of myself in here and I'll tell a story. And if it works, it works. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. And at the very least, I still have my audiobook job.
Well, speaking of your audiobook job, let me ask, you did this because you wanted to go through the process of publishing because you narrate other people's books.
Right.
You narrated your own book.
Oh, yeah.
What was that? That's a different, because now all of a sudden, let's say I'm an author, you're not giving me the dailies, so to speak. You're listening to them yourself.
Well, I mean, the funny thing is there aren't even in dailies in this. When you do an audiobook, you just read it, you don't listen to any of it, and you send it off. Okay. It's just like bullets fired. But as an author reading their own stuff, I'm basically get to cheat because this is an industry I know. I know how to do this. So it was the easiest narration job I've ever done.
Okay.
So when you're narrating, it's like 50% anticipation. You're reading a line and you're making judgment calls based on this sort of like scan ahead that you're doing with your eyes of where the author is going to go. How's the tone going to shift? Okay. Is this going to go up or down? Is this questioning? Is it, sarcastic? Whatever. All the tone, you're making all these little judgment calls about tone. And when you mess up, it's usually because you misjudged. So the closer you are to being simpatico with the author, the kind of things that you would write, like the word order even. So there's like certain authors where I will transpose words constantly. It means the same thing. But mentally, they would always put those two words in a different order. Okay. But I mess up more with them because I'm not simpatico. Well, you cannot be more simpatico with anybody than yourself. I know the characters. I know I know everything. There's never a second guess. I'm just going. So it was like it was like dancing. It was just the easiest narration job ever. It was super pleasant. If all of them could be that easy, I would just come out of my booth with a smile every day.
Is there anything else you want to try that, because I mean, you've done a lot of things and you were like, I want to know more about publishing. So I'm going to write a book and publish it. You were in games, you're kind of all over the entertainment field. Is there anything you want to do that you haven't?
I mean, I don't know. I'm kind of a serial hobbyist normally, but now my hobbies have mostly taken over all of my my available time.
Okay.
I'm certainly interested in a lot of things. I don't know if I'm going to do another big career shift or not. It feels like adding an author on is a pretty big shift and opens up all kinds of things I hadn't considered before. So I'm trying to, for once, just enjoy that ride as much as I can, which will be easier after I finish this first draft. And after I untangle my life, I'm suddenly doing two jobs at once, and I didn't plan for it. So as a narrator, my life is heavily scheduled, as in 3 years in advance. So okay. I've got hundreds of books on the schedule that have blocks of time and need to get done. So adding book tours and writing books and all those things was not on the plan. So it's been a little bit of a fraught year in that respect. That doesn't really color my experience with the first book. It was uniformly positive, but it makes the rest of the year cramped in a way that it wouldn't otherwise be.
So the next ones will be a little bit, at the very least, you'll start adding that time into the schedule. In
2026. I mean, my schedule gets less dense as it goes out, and I just put a hard stop on adding new audiobook bookings anyway. There's too much on the schedule as it is. So there's always things that get canceled or deferred or whatever, and I'm just going to let that happen. I'm not filling those holes. So I'm just going to try and reclaim a little breathing room so that these two things can coexist.
Is this it? Is this Travis forever? Like, is there a retirement plan where like I'm going to hang up my microphone, or is it like, I might always do this?
I'm always going to do something.
Okay.
I don't think I'm one of those people who can retire, because if I'm not making something, I get super depressed.
You and me.
I'm incapable of relaxation as just an idle thing.
I like telling this story to people like you who will understand it. I challenged myself. The blog's been consistent for a very long time. But in the first few years, I bought a house. And when you buy a house, and I was moving from an apartment to a house, and I had a lease overlap, so you have time to move. Mm-hmm. And the blog kind of fell away. And then I moved into my house, and I unpacked, and I went, I'm going to challenge myself. And I'm going to do 2 posts a week for an entire rolling year. 'Cause why wait? Let's just start it now. So it started in, I think in November, and it went through October the following year. And I got to the end. I had done, overachiever, I guess. I did not do 104 blog posts in 52 weeks. I did like 130, right? But I went, all right, I'm done. I took a week off of my real job, and I was going to take a week off from everything else. I had kind of worked a little bit extra to get ahead. And I sat down on Monday with nothing to do. And like, Monday was fine. Tuesday, I enjoy the books that I have in my house, but I can't just keep reading. Like, I need to do something else. And by Wednesday, I was like, no, I'm going to write again. I can't not do something. Like, it was just, I gave myself an entire week off from everything. I couldn't last more than 3 days.
The dopamine hit of making something creatively is better than most things. So you just get withdrawal.
I guess, yeah.
I mean, it's basically addictive. And so when you have to cut that, whatever it is that you're cutting it for has to do better than that for me, right? It's got to be better than that. That doesn't mean like being creative is like great all the time. There's lots of blah. There's things that are hard to do and things that are shitty, but you always have the inherent knowledge that making something could potentially make you feel better than any other way that you feel. And just having that sure knowledge and sitting idle, it's really hard for those two things to coexist. For me.
Oh, no. I mean, you and me both. Let's go back to the very beginning of this conversation. I asked Travis how it felt to know that I know him as an author, while he's only just published his first book, and he's worn many other titles and careers for longer. It's an interesting concept because I think of what people could know me as, right? For those of you who have been around for a while, there's Producer Palmer, which is now more than just a podcast thing, but this isn't the time and place to discuss that. There's blogger, editor, marketer, and a few other combinations and subgenres to those titles, as well as podcaster. And what we are known as isn't really about what we project. It's how people perceive, get to know, and interact with us. Eventually, people listening to this show or talking to me may get to learn the width and breadth of all the many hats and titles and roles I have accumulated, but their first is their first. They saw the blog first, so I'm a blogger. They heard the podcast first, so I'm a podcaster. Or as in my case with Travis, I read his book first, so he's an author. But let's get personal. 2 of my best friends have been on this podcast and will probably return again, Jason Zapata and Christopher J. Hughes. Zapata is first and foremost a friend and a brother, but I know him to be a writer and poet, a philosopher, and a gamer both in the sense of video and physical games, and a baker as well. Chris is also first and foremost a friend and a brother, but I also know him to be an editor, writer, designer, comedian, journalist, video gamer, and most recently a filmmaker. Now, these two examples are skewed a bit because having met them in school, Zapata in high school and Chris in college, when we were all students. But at that time, you don't think of each other that way. You're just people. You're not students. This means I got to know them regardless of what they do and what they like, and I would like to think that I know them well enough to know what each title each of them would want, but I won't guess that here. Just suffice to say, I'm sure that they could list off just as many titles for me and probably choose accurately the one for me as well. And which one would I want them to use if introducing me to other people? Now we're talking about circumstance and preference, right? If among other podcasters or bloggers, I guess go with the crowd, unless it would be better to stand out and then go against it. The point is, I think we're all flexible when we have many potential titles, and we all really do have many potential titles. But if pressed, really pressed, what would you want your title to be? Notice that of my friends, I didn't include their professional careers, though there is some overlap, and I didn't really do the same for myself either. Remember, we are all in charge and at the helm of our own narrative. So as I ponder what my answer would be, which of the many hats that you wear would you want to be the one people knew you by the most? Let me know. Thanks for listening to the Palmer Files, episode 83. As a reminder, all links are available in the show notes. And now for the official business. The Palmer Files releases every 2 weeks on Tuesdays. If you're still listening, I encourage you to join the discussion. You can tweet me at Agent Palmer, my guest Travis Baldree at Travis Baldree. Again, that's TravisBaldree, and this show at the Palmer Files. And you should follow him for information on that next book he's currently working on. Perhaps he's already tweeted a title if you're interested. Additionally, you can find more information about Travis, Legends and Lattes, his narrations, and any future works at travisbaldree.com. Email can be sent to this show at thepalmerfiles@gmail.com. And remember, your home for all things Agent Palmer, including a review of Travis's debut novel, is agentpalmer.com. All right, Travis, do you have one final question for me?
All right. So it's a theoretical question.
Okay.
Semi-serious. If there was one big technological advancement that's happened in the last 20 years that you would remove, what would it be?
Broadband. Or Wi-Fi, one of the two. I want to bring the speeds back. I as much as I think that it's a great thing that like I can be lazy, sit on my couch and not have to get up and put a DVD in. I feel like that it allows people to take for granted the speed and the accessibility that we have. And having grown up in an era where, 14-year-old me could choose between dial-up, maybe kind of playing a lag-infested game of Quake with some friends, or going out and actually playing Capture the Flag. Like, I'm glad that I had that, because 14-year-old me went out and played Capture the Flag with my friends. Yeah. Because if it was raining, we would play lag-infested Quake, or we'd have a LAN party where you could literally mess with your friends while you're playing with them. But I think that one of the big things that in my personal life that comes up a lot is community and how it's gone. And a lot of things would be solved if community came back. Well, as long as people are comfortable creating their own community of people that they may or may not really know, that aren't really around them to help them, let's say, move or have a meal with, I feel like we've kind of destroyed our community in a sense. And I feel like if we got rid of Wi-Fi and we got rid of broadband and we made it slow like it was, people might go out more. Yeah. Or they might do the other thing.
Would you be okay with the cost of giving up the podcast? Because, I mean, it's kind of like predicated on having that technology available, right?
I mean, the blog is the same way. You know, I mean, yeah, I could turn the blog into completely text.
Get those GIFs down real small. Yeah. You can make the blog work.
And look, my entire professional career has been based off of digital marketing, right? Like so I need a new job, profession. Yeah.
But it would be worth the cost to you.
I think it would because I would not be alone. Like I'm at the height of the pandemic. I have a friend, very good friend, like best friend. I went to high school with him. He lives a few blocks away from me, which is unique because we didn't always live in the same town once we graduated high school. And during the pandemic, I made him come over for dinner once a week. Because I was like, you live alone in an apartment, and I'm not letting you stay alone in an apartment for long periods of time. At least once a week, you're coming over here where me and my partner can host you. We can have dinner. We can get takeout. It doesn't matter. We'll just socialize.
Yeah.
I don't think there's enough people, not saying like me, but I don't think there's enough people making an effort for the social aspect because they think that the digital is enough. And I, as much of an introvert as I am, as much as I very much love my setup, we still need social interaction, like real social interaction. And I feel like there's a part of me, while this is a hypothetical, I feel like if that never goes away, I don't know if that social aspect ever really comes back.
Yeah. And I feel like there's kind of like two parts going on to it too, because you're right. This loss of like person to person, very present interaction.
Yeah.
But there's this other side that I think we got out of this, which is people being able to find people out in the world and connect to people that they would never have been able to connect with at all otherwise.
I'm completely going to admit to you that Stephanie, who lives with me and moved in with me, I met on Twitter through a podcast that we were both listening to. So if I shut everything down, we never meet.
Yeah.
Right? So I understand that, but and it's not like a sacrifice I'm willing to make because obviously I'm shutting I'm in this. I'm presuming that I'm turning it off now, not turning it off before. But there are instances where that happens, and I've got friends, very close friends I've never met. Right? Because I still talk to them because I'm still like, I'm going to call you on the phone. We're going to talk.
What we need is like the purge, but for broadband, just once a week. All broadband is off.
That could be. Yeah, I mean, I'm amenable. I don't need to hit the button and completely turn it off forever. But
day.
Yeah, I want it. I don't want to be alone. Like, I don't want to feel like my efforts to be like, I'm not doing it for everybody. Like, I want to state that right now, but I kind of know the names of most of my neighbors in my neighborhood. Feel like that makes me a rare person. But I don't know. I just, we rely too much on it. And I think that's a problem.
Yeah. It's very easy to have as a crutch. And everybody got even more entrenched with COVID because there was that solid day-to-day reason not to interact with anybody. And then you get comfortable with it. This happened with my kids, right? You do go to homeschooling. So they're all at home. They're on Zoom all day. They don't see any other kids. But you become accustomed to being able to interact that way and to be able to check out when you want to in all ways. You know, the pressure can be taken off at any moment. And it becomes very easy to be comfortable with that and hard to go back. So when the kids had to go back to school, it's like, oh my God, I could be on in front of all of these other people and they're bumping into me and they're invading my personal space and I'm not in my pajamas and, you know, I can't look over at YouTube when the class is boring. You know, it was just like this big shock going back. They didn't want to. They didn't like, you know, nobody liked being cooped up at home, but there were aspects that they got really accustomed to that was very difficult to give up.
And they're things that you and I never would have considered. Like, I remember being in a boring class and attempting to sneak a magazine in front of me.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and God forbid you get caught, but like
Yep.
that was the chance. That was our YouTube window.
Yep.
And so it was.
There was also other like little weird structural things. I don't want to get too far off, but like if you when you are that decoupled from like in person, if you're done with your work in a class, you can get the work done in another class. And so they were always done with school by the time school was over. There was never like homework because the amount of dead time traveling between classes or when you're done and twiddling your thumbs for the bell, it all evaporated. It all got used for other things.
Yeah.
So there was this massive optimization of time. Maybe it still wasn't the best use. Homeschool is not, Zoom school is never going to be a patch on the interaction of real school. But there were things that were like time benefits that they really acutely perceived. I
think that's the other thing. I think it goes back to why I turn it all off is not all optimization's good. Being bored has value. Yeah.
It's hard to acknowledge when you have a phone and you can entertain yourself at literally any second, at any time, in any way you want. So it's very hard to acknowledge, because it's so comfortable to be able to entertain yourself. I mean, just somebody being able to sit through a movie, if it's got a slow bit, it's like, just a second, I'm going to check my tweets. That was a boring scene. Oh, no, it's back? Okay, cool.
I try to, my Fitbit died a couple months ago and I haven't replaced it because I like the idea that if I put my phone down, I'm actually disconnected.
Yeah.
Or if I leave it in the next room. It's not
going to vibrate on your wrist.
Yeah. It's not vibrating on my wrist. And if I actually leave it in another room and there's a slow part in whatever we're watching, I'm stuck watching the slow part.
Yeah.
Like that's just.
My phone is perpetually on Do Not Disturb. I've never turned it off. It's always on Do Not Disturb. So it only says anything to me when I pick it up and look at it. At the very least, the onus is on me.